It's time for Sweden to admit explosions are a national emergency. Take a look at this here photo. When I went to Sweden in 2017, there was just before, like a couple months, I think, a grenade attack on a balcony which killed an 8-year-old tourist. I think that's what happened. It's been a while, but I do have a list of the grenade attacks over at Wikipedia. So this is a story published by Quillette, and this may be a surprise to many people, but yes, Sweden has an ever-increasing grenade attack and bomb problem. Look at this photo. For those that are watching the podcast, or listening on the podcast, we've got two buildings with their balconies just ripped to shreds from some kind of explosion. So let's read a little bit of this, and then I actually want to look at a more in-depth view on what's going on, because of course there will be accusations of bias with Quillette, but I actually have the Wikipedia here for the article, which pulls quotes from mainstream reliable sources, talking about how, and here we go, quote, "It's widely known that gang members are mainly first and second generation immigrants, and yet politicians in government and opposition seem particularly concerned that violence in immigrant suburbs is a PR problem, a threat to the image of Sweden." I can actually comment on a lot of this, though I haven't been to Sweden in a very long time. But before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work there. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, physical address, but of course, like and comment on the video. That's the best thing you can do. The engagement really helps. Share the link if you like it. Subscribe. That's, if you want more videos like this. Quillette writes, "The bomb exploded shortly after 9 a.m. Friday in a blast that ripped through two apartment buildings and could be heard for miles. 25 people suffered cuts and bruises, and 250 apartments were damaged. A nearby kindergarten was evacuated. Hospitals jumped into disaster mode. Photos from the scene show rows of demolished balconies and shattered windows. It was absolutely incredible that no one was severely injured," a police spokesperson said. "It is the new kind of news we usually associate with war zones, but this bombing took place in Linköping, a peaceful university town in southern Sweden. Remarkably, it was not the only explosion in the country that day. Another seemingly unrelated blast was reported in a parking lot in the city of Gothenburg. Earlier in the morning, 3 explosions had been reported in Malmö since Tuesday morning." Oh, okay, 3 explosions have been reported in Malmö since Tuesday morning. As of this writing, no arrests have been made. Sweden has experienced a sharp rise in explosions in recent years, predominantly related to conflicts between warring criminal gangs. The use of explosives in the Nordic country is now at a level that is unique in the world for a state not at war, according to police. So I was trying to figure out, how can you frame that properly? You can't say that Sweden is the grenade attack capital of the world, because grenade attacks in war zones are worse. But for anything outside of a war zone, Sweden takes the cake. Particularly per capita, I'm not entirely sure, because the U.S. is huge. I actually don't think we have grenade attacks like this in the U.S. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure if someone threw a grenade at somebody else, it'd be major news. So they say. In response, the government issued a first ever amnesty for explosives in the fall of 2018. Well, why don't they just make grenades illegal? Problem solved, right? I'm kidding. Allowing people in possession of such weapons to hand them over to police with immunity. But this didn't stem the tide. Some 50 explosions were reported in the first 3 months of 2019 alone, an average of more than 1 every other day, and an increase over the same period in 2018, a year that saw a record number of more than 3 blasts per week. Good Lord, look at this chart. So a lot of people ask me, people have no sense of time, okay? I was in Sweden in 2017. I was there early 2017, which means we were looking back mostly at 2016. And yes, we did talk about grenade attacks, particularly being in Malmö. There were 4, and we did talk about them. We can see then Gothenburg was, I believe Gothenburg was where the 8-year-old was living when the grenade went off and took the child's life. I could be wrong on that story because it has been a long time. But anyway, the point is, people say, "I thought you said that things weren't so bad, Tim, yada, yada." And it's really funny because there's no real way to kind of approach news without being attacked by somebody. We went to Sweden and we said, the right is wrong. It's not as bad as everyone's claiming it is, but the left is wrong too. They're acting like literally nothing is happening. The reality is there has been a steady increase in violent crime, especially in Malmö, over the past several years. But you have a lot of people acting like it's a war zone. And so the way I describe it is, I'm from Chicago. Chicago had something like, 800 deaths from gun crime, gangs, and other weird, social infighting. And when you live in Chicago and you see all of that, and then someone tells you Sweden has a massive increase in crime, your perception is based on where you live. So you imagine your place where you live and then crime being worse. When in reality, Sweden has crime, but it's I think Malmö had 13 murders in the year, which is way, way less than Chicago did. Granted, they also had a tenth of the population. So even if you scaled it up by 10, it's still a lot less than Chicago. The issue isn't whether or not there's too much, too little, or whatever the issue is. The issue is the scaling. And that's what I tell people. Listen, if you live in a place where there was one murder and then the next year there's 13, you'll start freaking out because you're hearing it every month. And now look at this chart. 2018, massive spike. In the past 10 years, there have been 116 detonated grenades, it would seem. So yes, I will state, no problem. 2016 definitely seemed to be the peak. And things have been going down since then. But for 2019, it sounds like we're going to be on track for an increase of some sort. There were, in 2018, there weren't any attacks in Malmö. But now, and again, I don't know if they have any yet, but they say this, and I read this, but they say 50 explosions were reported in the first 3 months of 2019 alone. An average of more than one every other day. So take a look at this. The total hand grenades going from 2018 and back is 116. As of right now, in the first 3 months of 2019, they are on track to what? Quadruple a 10-year record for grenade attacks. Look at this. In Stockholm, in all of 10 years, was only 46, and Sweden's already had 50. There was another really crazy thing that happened when we were in Sweden, and it was that the police actually issued a statement saying that there were roving gangs of Moroccan teenagers gang assaulting women. And so I guess, the main reason I want to bring this up is because it sounds like it's worse than it's ever been. Let's read a little bit more, and then I'll jump over to the Wikipedia. There's been a corresponding marked escalation in gang-related shootings which increasingly take place in broad daylight. Sweden had 45 deadly shootings in what police refer to as criminal environments last year, which is an increase by a factor of 10 in one generation. In contrast, neighboring Norway has less than 3. Deadly shootings per capita in Sweden are now considerably higher than the European average, and systemic witness intimidation paired with a code of silence in the country's socioeconomically weak immigrant areas has made this type of crime difficult for the Swedish legal system to tackle. I want to stress something. A lot of people said to me, crime has been going down across the board in Europe, but it's been going down slower in Sweden. And when it comes to statistics and data, there's a lot of important factors that are omitted because people just don't see them. One important factor in all crime everywhere as to why we're seeing lethal crime going down dramatically is that cell phones happened. Yes, I kid you not. The advent of ubiquitous cell phone usage resulted in less lethal crime. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But let me explain it. It's not that people aren't trying to kill other people. It's that you're substantially more likely to survive. But what ends up happening is people look at charts and they say murder rate down. And they go, wow, murder is way down. That must mean people aren't killing each other as much anymore. No. Technically, they may be trying more or less. We don't know. What we do know is people are less likely to die for the simple reason that when people are shot or stabbed, they can immediately call emergency services. Before cell phones, you'd have to run and try and find a phone, and that's precious time, and someone could bleed out. So now people, and that's just one example. There's probably a ton of other examples which can explain uptrends and downtrends and who knows what. It could possibly be that there aren't more grenade attacks. They're just now reporting them. Who knows? It makes statistics really, really hard to track. But I can say this. Sweden, according to many politicians, and I talked to several politicians who told me this, and this is what blows my mind. The politicians told me this. The left-wing Swedish politicians said when they first brought in many Somali migrants and refugees and people from, Syria, Afghanistan, etc., Lebanon, they just let them go wherever they wanted. And what happened was communities formed that there was no incentive for these migrants to integrate. This created huge problems for the youth. So here's what was explained to me by basically everybody. They said, left, right, center, whatever. They were all saying basically the same thing. You have these Somali migrants who come to Sweden and they have kids. But because they live in their own neighborhoods, their own little enclaves, they don't interact with greater Sweden as a whole. So something happens then when the children of these immigrants who were born in Sweden and are Swedish citizens are treated like foreigners. They can't interact with Sweden. There's no social cohesion at all. And it's Sweden's fault. So now this was 2 years ago. They said they have a new program where they're spreading people out and they're assigning places for them to go, which will help people actually integrate in Swedish society. Sweden, I was told by several people, many white people, is notoriously racist. And what I mean by that, or what they explained to me, is it's not racist as in like, how they would describe the far right or anything like that. It's this elitist, snooty, Beitswa type racism, where they act like they're super elite and better than you, and it's a soft bigotry of low expectations, but they still don't want you in their cafes, right? The idea being, they talk about how wonderful and how nice they are for letting all these people in, and then push them into a ghetto and say, look at all the people we brought in from these poor countries. We're such good people. And then those people are poor and hungry, and they're not allowed to, they struggle to find work. They struggle for education. They're treated like foreigners in the country they were born in, the children of these migrants. And the Swedish people act like they're, all high and mighty. And this results in the obvious. One of the biggest problems, one of the most annoying things I have with race realists and the racists in this regard is that they're like, see, the Somalians are coming here. That proves blah, 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 blah. No. What this proves is that Sweden, a wealthy society that exports weapons to make their money, took a bunch of poor refugees, crammed them into a ghetto, and offered them very little and said, you're on your own. And then the people in Sweden, these regressive Beitswa means like, for those that aren't familiar, it's a Chinese word that refers to people who care more about their appearance and pretend to be for social justice. There's a longer explanation, but they basically talk about how we're all for helping these people. Yes, then stop cramming them in ghettos and basically creating these pockets of poverty. If there's one thing we know is true, it's that poverty breeds crime. And if you create these areas where you force these people into these ghettos and then they struggle to find work, they can't pay their rent, so they turn to crime, you can't then turn around and get all racist about it. Certainly, traits can be inherited. I'm not a scientist on this matter. I'm not a scientist, especially not a biologist. But I've read a lot about this, and there's a lot of intelligent people who I respect in this capacity. But it really frustrates me when, regardless of what your thoughts are on the people from wherever, there's one thing that's simple, and it's that Sweden is not doing. Okay, hold on. Let me stop. They may have been changing this, over the past few years to rectify this problem. But I want to make sure I stress the problems we're seeing with grenade attacks specifically, as they mention in this Wikipedia article, that it is gang members who are mainly first and second generation immigrants, and they're being ignored. Why don't you just be honest about it? One of the reasons is a lot of people told me that they were scared of like perpetuating racism or whatever. And it's like, dude, if you were honest, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Perhaps you can tell people how you took neighborhoods, put everybody in there at once, and then what do you think people are going to do? They talk to each other in their native tongue. And because of this, it's harder for them to learn the language. They don't integrate. They don't make friends. They have no connections to the outside society. So they reject it. And I don't blame them. It's like someone, lets you in the house and then puts you in the basement and says you're on your own. It's like, well, dude, don't be surprised if they're going to go up to the kitchen and take some of your food if they're hungry, right? I'm not trying to justify any of the crime or the gang violence by no means. I'm trying to talk about how this is a systemic problem of faux social justice. And this is why I get, so frustrated by many people on the left in this regard. And they're emboldening, the far right, the alt right, whatever you want to call it. Because on the surface, it's really easy to point to the migrants and refugees and say, aha, they're a refugee. Therefore, that proves it. It's like, no. They're doing the right thing now by spreading people out. That way, the people will be in the community. They'll get the education they deserve, and you can't just push people out. Sweden's got a long way to go, and terrifyingly, it sounds like in the first 3 months of this year, things are worse than they've ever been, more so than any other year before it. And we're gonna keep hearing about this, and you're gonna hear both sides pulling as hard as they can to prove one thing or another. Actually, I'd be willing to bet the left doesn't talk about it at all. Because you got a lot of these, let's point to California. This is a perfect example of why I point the finger at corruption in the Democratic Party. I don't think the issue is entirely Democrat or liberal policy. Although I certainly think it's fair to point to it on the surface and say, well, look, if you did it didn't work, maybe there's a problem you should look into. That's why I'm a moderate, leaning a little to the left. I have no problem pointing to somebody who enacted a policy that failed. One of the problems of government is that the programs don't die when they fail, and they should. Businesses, they don't work, they fail. Government don't work, they just ask for more money and put a Band-Aid on it. But it doesn't mean government is always bad. It doesn't mean it can't work. We definitely need a lot of these programs, and they can do good things. The problem is you get these politicians who put on a fake smile and they talk about, we're going to do all these great things to help people. You get them elected, and then what happens in California? Okay, we got a housing bill. We got a bunch of homeless people. And they go, yeah, not in my backyard. And there it is. See, here's the thing. Democrats like campaigning on emotion. And it's really easy to manipulate people's emotions. I'm not saying Republicans don't campaign on emotion. But Democrats really, really go for the poor marginalized babies. And Republicans are much, much more callous. Not trying to say that to be disrespectful. But you go to CPAC and what do they say? Personal responsibility. It's your responsibility. And that is, to a certain extent, more callous than what the Democrats are doing. So I have respect for the real Democrats, like the real people on the left who are saying, I really do want to help. What's the right way to do it? And both sides know the old idiom, if you teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for the rest of his life. And that's what's not being done. Okay, so the real solution for me, it's like, hey, we could do a government program to fix all these problems, but there's nuance and it's complicated. It's not black or white. You can't just throw people into a ghetto and be like, problem solved. Yeah, because 10, 20 years later, those kids go out and they say, I can't get school. I can't get work. What am I supposed to do? And then they resent the Swedish government and they say, you know what? We're not part of your society. And it's the fault of the lazy politicians who kick the can down the road and act like they've done something. Someone walks up and says, hey, there's litter on the ground. And they kick it and say, what litter? Yeah, you didn't get rid of the litter. You just kicked it down the road for other people to deal with later. And that's the problem. You really want to help these people, education, integration, language programs. It's more than just taking them in. And this is what Sweden is now dealing with. So you know what? My information on Sweden is a couple years outdated. They may have started implementing a lot of programs. I don't want to just drag them over what they're doing now because I'm not entirely familiar with what they're doing now. But what I can say is, when I was there in 2017, we were talking to, I believe it was the mayor of Södertälje, who said, yes, they're now spreading people out so they can integrate better and get better access to resources, and we can prevent these problems. And that is respectable. That is wonderful. And that's what they should be doing. But now they're going to have to reckon with their faux social justice. Letting people in and putting them in ghettos is not helping anybody. And this is why I can throw it back to the American immigration crisis, the southern border. Listen, the left doesn't understand this. If you just let people in, what you see in Sweden is what we get here. People need access to society. They need access to resources. They need to be placed in positions where the economy can handle it. And this is what blows my mind. They're like, oh no, defund ICE. We shouldn't do all these things. Like, do you have any idea what would happen if we weren't helping those people trying to come in and stopping, too many? Here's what I would say. Everybody in the world is welcome here in the U.S. so long as they all follow the legal process. You know why? Because then we can make sure growth works in a way that makes sense. Now, obviously, I think at a certain point it just wouldn't work. Like, I don't literally think 7 plus 8 billion people are going to be able to fit in the U.S. What I'm saying is everybody needs to go through a process so that we can say, okay, we don't want you to be poor, we don't want you to be sick, and we don't want you in a ghetto. That's what will happen if we do nothing. So let's take your name down, figure out where you need to go and what you need so we can help you properly. Otherwise, it's going to be bad for everybody. And there you go. There's Sweden. I'll leave it there. I could rant on this for another half an hour, but I'll leave it. Thanks for watching. I'll have more stories, next story at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I'll see you then.